On the morning of December 1st, 2016, 15-year-old Diana woke to a sound she couldn't place. It was her mother's phone alarm, going off in the kitchen, beeping into an empty room. She knocked on the bedroom door. No answer. She opened it. Nobody inside. She walked through every room of the house on Husky Drive in St. Anthony, Newfoundland. Her mother's phone was on the counter. Her purse was on the table. Her car keys were still in the ignition in the driveway. Even the bathtub was still full, just as it had been left. Everything was inside that house. Everything but Jennifer. Jennifer Hillier-Penney was born on January 31st, 1978, in the small Newfoundland community of Saint-Lunaire-Griquet, on the province's Great Northern Peninsula. She was the youngest of 7 children. Her brothers Glenn and Gary and her sister Yvonne were among those closest to her, and she grew up in a home that people who knew the family described as full of love. She was funny. That was the word that came up most often among the people who knew her. Funny and kind, and genuinely caring in a way that drew people toward her without effort. She had her first daughter, Marina, at 17, and far from turning away from the responsibility, she became defined by it. Her world, her friend said, revolved around her girls. By 2016, Marina had grown up, and Jennifer's youngest daughter, Dina, was 15. Jennifer spoke to Marina nearly every day. They were close enough that people who didn't know them would mistake them for sisters. Jennifer had settled in St. Anthony, the largest community on the Northern Peninsula, a town of roughly 2,500 people that clings to the edge of the Atlantic coast, with a man named Dean Penny, a local fisherman she had known since high school. They had been together for close to 2 decades. By 2016, it was over. The separation had begun in September 2016. Jennifer moved back to her father's house in Saint-Lunaire-Griquet. She was done. Her daughter Marina would later say that Jennifer had stopped loving Dean years earlier, that they had been young when they got together, had grown apart, and that Jennifer, by 2016, was clear about wanting a new life. She had lined up a job interview in Glovertown, a town roughly 7 hours south, and had made an appointment with a lawyer named Jim Bennett to begin divorce proceedings. That appointment was scheduled for December. Jennifer never made it to December. Her friends knew she was frightened. Not of the separation itself, Jennifer was resolute about that, but of what Dean might do when he fully understood she wasn't coming back. Her friend Gina Elliott described an informal safety plan the women had put together in the weeks before Jennifer disappeared. Daily check-ins, staggered, so that if one of them wasn't in contact, the other would follow up. Jennifer had texted a friend to say Dean was accusing her of seeing someone else, that all hell would break loose. She wrote that she didn't trust him. Jennifer had been told, in no uncertain terms, that she would be made to disappear, and that they would never find her. Gina Elliott knew this. Jennifer had heard that threat directly and believed it. On November 16, 2016, the same day that Marina later said was also the day Jennifer's life was explicitly threatened. Jennifer went to work and had a colleague witness a document, a change to her life insurance policy, removing Dean Penny as a beneficiary and leaving her 2 daughters in his place. She signed it and went home. 2 weeks later, she was gone. By late November, Dean had gone to his hunting cabin in Northwest Arm, roughly 45 minutes outside St. Anthony. He told people he would be there for the week, duck hunting. Jennifer was asked to stay at the house on Husky Drive to be with Dina while he was away. She didn't want to. She didn't want to be in that house. But Dina's school was right next to it, and Dina wanted to stay. So Jennifer went. Her sister Yvonne was one of the last people to see her that evening. She had been riding in Jennifer's car, and Jennifer dropped her at a local appointment. Before she left, she told Yvonne she had a headache and was going to lie down. She said she'd see her tomorrow. Jennifer drove back to the house on Husky Drive, drew a bath, and texted Dina to say she was going to bed early. Dina came home late, saw the light under her mother's door, and didn't disturb her. At 4:47 that afternoon, Dean had texted Jennifer. "Is she home yet?" Jennifer replied, That was the last message she ever sent. Dean sent 4 more texts after that, the final one at 7:17 p.m, asking Jennifer to have Dina call him when she got home safe. Jennifer didn't answer any of them. Cell tower data presented at trial would later show that Dean Penney spent 4 hours in St. Anthony that evening, between 6 p.m. and 10:30 p.m, contradicting his claim that he had been at his cabin all night. When Diana woke the next morning and found the house silent, the bathtub still full, her mother's phone beeping on the counter, she understood in the way that 15-year-olds sometimes understand terrible things before they can name them. She called her grandmother. When the RCMP first responded to the Penney home on Husky Drive, they did not immediately treat Jennifer's absence as suspicious. A full week passed before the RCMP officially designated her disappearance as suspicious. In those 7 days, an estimated 100 people, family, friends, police officers, moved in and out of the house. Forensics weren't called in until days later. The questions Jennifer's cousin Vicky Burden asked were the same ones the family couldn't let go of. Why wasn't the house cordoned off immediately? Why were people allowed to come and go freely through the last place Jennifer had been alive? Months into the investigation, police were still calling Vicky asking for Jennifer's laptop password. Jennifer's family pushed back from the beginning, telling police this was not a runaway, not a suicide, not a woman who had slipped away for a break. Her boots were at the door. Her passport was in the house. Her car was in the driveway. Jennifer Hillier-Penney would not have left her daughters without a word. She would not have left her phone. A police dog was brought in and found no scent of Jennifer beyond the house on Husky Drive, as if she had simply stopped existing at the front door. Searchers moved along the roads out of St. Anthony, across the countryside, eventually into the harbour. Nothing was found. By December 7th, 2016, the RCMP issued a statement acknowledging the disappearance was suspicious. They believed, their documents showed, that she had been kidnapped and killed. No suspects were publicly named. St. Anthony is a small place. When someone disappears in a town of 2,500 people, the loss is not abstract. It is present every day, in every shop window, at every fuel station, at the Tim Hortons on the main road. Jennifer's face went up on posters almost immediately, and those posters stayed. When they faded in the rain and wind, Gina Elliott hammered up new ones. Again and again, for years, the signs carried a message that was simple and deliberate. Someone knows something. Jennifer's father died in 2019 without answers. Her brother Glenn described the fear that had settled over those years, that the RCMP would one day call and say they had exhausted every avenue, that the file was going cold, that his sister would remain unfound and unaccounted for forever. It was a fear shared by a community that had watched, for 7 years, as Dean Penney continued to live among them. Throughout those years, Dean Penney remained in St. Anthony. He gave statements to police. He spoke briefly to journalists. When the Fifth Estate, CBC's long-form investigative program, came to St. Anthony in 2018, they found him on the street. He confirmed he had come back to the house that night for his duck decoys. He confirmed his daughter Dina had seen him. He denied any knowledge of what had happened to Jennifer. Asked directly whether he had done it, he said, "No, definitely not." A man named Morley Hillier, no relation to Jennifer, but someone who had grown up next door to her family, testified at trial that he had run into Dean in a Scotiabank parking lot in the weeks before Jennifer's disappearance. Dean had spoken about the separation and made a remark that stayed with him, that Jennifer was going to disappear and that the Hilliers weren't going to get anything he had worked for. Penney disputed that this conversation ever took place. The Crown also presented 627 pages of text messages between Dean and Jennifer, sent in the months between their separation and the night she vanished. In those texts, Dean told her it didn't matter that she no longer loved him, that she belonged there. On the day she disappeared, he texted her about their belongings, telling her he didn't want her taking half of what he had. 9 days before she vanished, Jennifer had consulted with lawyer Jim Bennett about retaining him for divorce proceedings. The December appointment never took place. What Jennifer's family and the public did not know, what nobody in St. Anthony knew, was that sometime in 2019, the RCMP had quietly begun one of the most complex and expensive undercover operations in Newfoundland's history. It was called a Mr. Big operation. The technique works like this. Undercover officers build a fictitious criminal organization over months or years, drawing a target into it through friendship, money, and manufactured trust, until the target, believing he is speaking among criminals who have no reason to expose him, either confesses or incriminates himself. The Supreme Court of Canada set strict guidelines for such operations in 2014, and those guidelines govern what can and cannot be done, and what evidence can and cannot be admitted. On September 13, 2019, an undercover RCMP officer, who would be known throughout the trial only as Vic, walked into the ice room of the local fish plant in St. Anthony and introduced himself to Dean Penney. He raised the possibility of renting Dean's cabin for a hunting trip. That was the opening. Over the next 4 years, Vic and Penny spent hundreds of hours together. They cooked meals. They watched movies. They took road trips across the country for what Penny believed were jobs for a national criminal organization. He drove courier runs, helped devise alibis, scouted locations. The operation involved approximately 100 RCMP employees in total. Some slept on the floor of the St. Anthony detachment during critical stretches. The undercover officer, who became Penny's closest friend, testified at trial that he had genuinely hoped the investigation would clear Penny, that he had wanted Penny to be innocent. But that wasn't how it went. Bit by bit, over 4 years, the operation built toward its purpose. November 30th, 2023, exactly 7 years to the day that Jennifer Hillier-Penney was last seen alive. Dean Penney was aboard a yacht in Vancouver, sitting across from a man known to him as Rudy, the head of the criminal organization, another undercover RCMP officer. Rudy told Penny that the group had intelligence suggesting Penny was about to be arrested for his wife's murder. He said a terminally ill member of the organization was prepared to take the fall, but only if Penny gave them every detail, so the cover story would hold up under police questioning. For nearly 3 hours, Dean Penney denied any involvement. He said it over and over again, in different ways. Then, around 26 minutes after his final denial, he started talking. He said he had come back to the house that night to collect his duck decoys. He parked down the road so as not to startle Jennifer. When he came through the garage door, she heard him. An argument started. She threatened to make calls. He tried to get past her. She moved to slap him. He pushed her. She tumbled backwards on the staircase, and her head struck the steel corner of a gun safe at the bottom of the stairs. He heard a groan, then silence. He checked for a pulse. There was none. Blood was coming from her ears and her nose. 8 days later, in a second recorded interview, Rudy pressed Penny for more. Penny gave it. He said he took a small mallet hammer from his tool wall and struck her on the side of the skull, in the same place where she was already bleeding. 2 or 3 times, hard. The third strike caused what he called a big splatter. He was certain after that. He wrapped her head in plastic wrap, put garbage bags over her body, and placed her inside a canvas Sea-Doo cover. He loaded her into the back of his SUV. His daughter Dina came to the garage door and said goodnight. He told her to go back inside and get some sleep. Then he left. He stopped at an Irving fuel station on his way out of town at roughly 10:45 p.m. He told Rudy he had done this deliberately, to put himself on camera, so it would look as if he had simply gone out for a drive and some coffee. He drove to his cabin at Northwest Arm, loaded Jennifer's body into his 12-foot fishing boat, and set out into Hare Bay in the dark. He went as far out as he could, to the deepest water he could reach near an area known as Goose Tickle in the Hare Bay Islands. He added rubber waders filled with rocks, tied to her body to make sure she sank. Then he threw everything overboard. He told Rudy she would never be seen again. He said he knew those waters. He said he knew exactly where she was. Penny had also given the undercover officer GPS coordinates, precise latitude and longitude of where he said he had dropped her body. The RCMP launched 6 separate diving and sonar missions into Hare Bay over the following 18 months, using remotely operated vehicles, acoustic survey technology, and support from the Royal Canadian Navy. Officers examined 133 anomalies on the seafloor. Every single one was a rock or something naturally occurring. No trace of Jennifer was found. The defense would later point to this as evidence that Penny's confessions were unreliable. If he had told the truth, they argued, something would have been there. The Crown's position was that years had passed, that the ocean floor near St. Anthony is rough and complex, and that what Penny disposed of was material that resists detection. The search has not officially been closed. Jennifer Hillier-Penney has never been recovered. Dean Penny was arrested on December 15, 2023, at the Deer Lake Airport. The RCMP had kept him occupied in Edmonton with logistical jobs for the fictitious organisation in the final days before the arrest, buying time while officers in Newfoundland prepared to move. He had no idea. The trial began on April 1, 2026, at the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador in Corner Brook, before Justice Vikas Kaladkar. It ran 7 weeks. The Crown built its case around the 2 recorded confessions, the cell tower data placing Penny in St. Anthony for 4 hours on the night Jennifer vanished, the parking lot remark Morley Hillier had carried with him for years, testimony from Jim Bennett confirming Jennifer had called about divorce proceedings 9 days before she disappeared, and testimony from Marina that her mother had told her she was scared of Dean. That she wouldn't say exactly why, but that she was. Penny took the stand for 5 days and said all of it was fabricated. He said he had invented every detail: the hammer, the waders, the boat, the coordinates. Because he believed a first-degree murder conviction in Canada carries a mandatory life sentence with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. A sentencing hearing has been scheduled for November 2026.